Welcome back, party people, to the Symba Luna Show character read. It's telenovela time! We are here to talk about Madre de Alquiler, which translates to the surrogacy. I think literally means mother for rent, but don't quote me. My Spanish is muy poquito. Which, just like telenovelas do, this shit had me up and down roller coaster like crazy. Because also, you could be a mother without giving birth, right? So, ugh. Anywho, this telenovela was very interesting to me. This is the very first one that I've ever watched that incorporated discussions about racism towards indigenous people in Mexico. I'm guessing maybe there are others, but outside of La Esclava Blanca, which I could not finish, I've never seen anything like this. So this was great. Buckle up, fasten your seatbelts. This story also has very many characters, and telenovelas do tragedy really well. But this was actually the first time I've really seen like a happy ending. Not for everybody, but for the people that matter. Unfortunately, there's a good number of people not surviving to the end, so I'm not going to do major spoilers like I've done in the past, because y'all got to see this for yourselves. I also left out some of those characters so that y'all can see it for yourselves, and I don't give everything away. Starting with characters that we love, this is Yenny, or Jenny, but Yenny, I think. Yenny was painted as a good person with lots of integrity, and I think that it was implied that that was based on the values and morals that she was raised with as an indigenous person. For me, the only thing questionable about Jenny was her sleeping with Carlos. But on the other hand, we find out that he was her first and he seduced her because he thought that she had lost Julia's last embryo. And he still wanted a baby out of it. So basically, Yenny gets caught up in this scheme slash contract to be the surrogate for this couple, Carlos and Julia, which I'll introduce them later. She had never wanted kids, but she did it in order to help her father, who was kind of set up by this family or their scheme. This is also really themed on rich versus poor and class versus race, or class and race. So because of the contract and everything, she wasn't really involved in like the doctor's appointments. Like, well, obviously she was involved, but they weren't really telling her anything. And she had no idea that she became pregnant with twins. She thought there was only one. But it wasn't like the regular twins, right? Because it was the superfectation, which was basically they thought that she had miscarried and then she got pregnant again. So she has one of their children as well as her own. So the reason why she also miscarried was because one of the doctors gave her an abortion pill. This doctor was basically a pawn of the CEO of the pharmaceutical company, which I'll get to. The abortion didn't work, but it gave this Carlos and Julia's son club foot. Nora, the grandmother as well as the CEO of the pharmaceutical company, didn't know that both babies weren't Carlos and Julia's. Because one of the babies was born with club foot, she was like, nobody in our family is disabled. Everybody's perfect. So she keeps the baby without the club foot and leaves Jenny with the baby with club foot, a white baby, on a park bench. We also love and we meet Francisco. We meet Francisco in the hospital because Jenny's father didn't survive an accident that his wife caused. His wife was also pregnant at the same time. So Lucy doesn't survive, but the baby does. Francisco learns that Jenny recently also had a baby and wants to help because that's what Lucy would have wanted. Jenny rejects the help at first because she thinks that he's offering her a handout that she would accept because of indigenous stereotypes. But he's very persistent in like doing the right thing and doing what Lucy would have wanted. And so they become good friends and raise the children together. The baby that she was left with and his baby. This is Sonia, our ride or die best friend. Like, how many of your friends will go on the run with you and just help them and their mama start a new business somewhere else? This one here. She was always encouraging her, fighting for her to be strong, and encouraging her that she could actually raise his baby. There is also Sonia's mother, Kuka, who was friends with her father, also very loyal, like a mother to her, until she passed. Don't want to give too much away about Sonia and Kuka because they also have a storyline that I think is important, but I just don't want to share too much. Then we have my lover, Kyus. Kyus was always the getaway driver. He fell in love with Sonia at first, but then really took it like a man when she only wanted to be friends. He becomes like a surrogate father to Luciano, Jenny's child. And he even fell in love with Jenny too, but didn't want to repeat his mistakes with Sonia. He definitely is the epitome of not trying to force the issue, because he also knew that Jenny was still in love with Carlos. Y'all gotta watch this so that you can see how he is a valued member of the family, and he eventually gets his love in the end, and I'm not gonna say who with. Next we have Francisca or Kika, but you don't actually see the kids older until towards the end of the telenovela. But she grew up best friends with Luciano, always encouraging him. She's also, as they grow up, like kind of his path to the internet. Also really wants her dad to be happy, and they didn't tell her the story right away about how her mother died and how they all became like this blended family. We also love and have older Luciano. They didn't really talk about their ages, but I think they did mention at one point like high school, so I kind of assumed that they were between like 16 and 17. Luciano is bold and knows what he wants. And technically, he is a white child. He was raised by an indigenous mother and is very much attached and loves the indigenous culture and upbringing. Even though Nora abandoned him for having club foot, Jenny was able to get him his treatments, and he's on his way to being a soccer player. Moving along to characters that we love, hate. These are people who became redeemable, but they were questionable at first. Up first is Marcella, the doctor, scientist, researcher, blah, blah. She was employed by Nora at the pharmaceutical company. In the opening scene, she was trying to resign because of this pharmaceutical thing that went wrong, and just the ways that the company was being really shady about what happened to the people. Basically, though, she's met with a lot of resistance, and she does seem stuck in this job. Overall, she was really like a person who loved what she does, but she really got caught up in the politics of working for a pharmaceutical company. I think she was really stuck between a rock and a hard place and wanting to do the right thing, but being controlled and used as a pawn. And it wasn't until she was able to get away from them entirely that she was able to then help the people that she actually harmed. Next, we have Balo. And this poor man was exploited. And literally, this poor man, they exploited this man because he was poor. We didn't like him at first because he was very misguided and he enacted a lot of schemes against Jenny and her father for the sake of money and being lied to as a result of being shot and disabled by Jenny's father. But he becomes redeemable because eventually he figures out that he is a pawn and that Jenny is actually very innocent. And not so much just with the innocence, but he's realizing that he's not getting what he's being promised. And he's also being made out to be a villain to take the fall for these rich folks. He figures that out. He decides to help Jenny, and then we don't see him anymore. Next, we have Fernanda. And this character is truly an eldest daughter scorned. She works at the pharmaceutical company as her mom's publicist and essentially like her right hand. But even though she had the very first grandchild, she's been like looked over while her mom is waiting for her son to have children. She starts out real foul, real shady, especially around the trials from the pharmaceutical company. She even was supposed to be the very first surrogate and miscarried on purpose. But it turns out she was really under the spell of her husband, who was just basically on the come up. She wanted to be approved and supported by her mother so bad that she listened to her husband more, and his shit got her in major trouble and caused major grief. To me, she redeemed herself at the end by helping Luciano and also going away. Next, in Love Hate, we have Julia. This is also Carlos, but starting with Julia. Julia is married into the Hiswar family. Hiswar? I forget, sorry. And she is desperate for approval as well as motherhood. She's living the high life, technically, but she's really also very unhappy, searching for answers, wanting children. Her family isn't around. Her mother-in-law treats her like waste for not producing children. They didn't trust her at first because she stalked Jenny and orchestrated the whole situation with Balo and getting her father in trouble, basically putting Jenny into a situation where she had to agree to be the surrogate. And due to lots of tragedies, like Nora telling them that Luciano died, her mental health goes on the major decline, even though now there's another child to raise. She struggles with that because she knows that this child is Jenny's and not hers. But she does become a lot better later and redeemable because she takes accountability and apologizes for all of her things. Welcome back to part 2 of Madre de Alquiler character reads by me. Continuing in the section of characters that we love hate, next is Carlos. So initially, Carlos seemed nice enough. We see him desperate to be a father, and apparently surrogacy is illegal in Mexico at this time, but they have exhausted all of their options. I really did not trust him for a good minute. He neglected Julia during Jenny's pregnancy and then fell in love with Jenny, which isn't bad in and of itself, but I worried that he was just stringing Jenny along. Once I also realized he was a pawn in his mother's schemes, because she told them that Luciano was dead. Not only told them that, but cremated him without them being able to see his body. So him and Julia were distraught, okay? And it wasn't that they didn't love the other baby, but, hearing that you got twins and then one of them dies and then you don't get to really see, I feel like they didn't get the closure they had hoped for or that they would have wanted in this situation. But he eventually grows a backbone to his mom and is like, we have to be accountable as a company. And so in addition to being accountable for his own actions, like getting Jenny pregnant as his own idea on his own, he was ready and willing to take accountability for all the messes that he made. And he even went public with his relationship with Jenny at the end, which she never thought was going to be real. Next, we have Nico. Pobrecito Nico. Nico is the first grandchild of the Huizar family, Fernandez's child, and Arturo's son. It's my opinion that his grandmother didn't pay attention to him as the first grandchild because of who his father was. Since she never really trusted him, I think she, said dismissal to his child. But despite growing up around so much mess, he was always so kind. According to Tessa, never told a lie in his life. But he was also very naive and just wanted his parents to be together. He created a lot of mess. And his father used him horribly, which led to tragedy. Next, we have Tessa. And unlike Nico, Tessa grew up loved and adored by her grandmother, Nora. Because of that, she really imitated and emulated a lot of the racist, classist rhetoric that Nora was proudly saying with her chest. She didn't feel loved by Julia because of Julia's depression and issues with her mental health as she was growing up. She was on her way to inheriting the pharmaceutical company until Nora found out that she was Jenny's child. And Tessa is a prime example of nurture versus nature, in my opinion. She was terrible and unkind, and I don't think she became redeemable until after the tragedy with Nico. And I think that tragedy really opened her up to understanding who her grandmother really was, as well as opened her heart to her indigenous background and her real mother, as well as her newly blended family. Moving on to characters that we hate, number 1, Arturo. This is villain number uno, a terrible person. Was cheating on Fernanda from the get-go. His only potential redeemable quality was that he loved his son. But when you realize he was manipulating his son's love for him, that goes all out the window. He had basically, by marrying Fernanda, married up, completely ditched his roots and his family, and becomes one of Nora's pawns in the hope of gaining power and a place in the pharmaceutical company, and especially acceptable social standing. Nora was many things, but the one thing she wasn't was stupid when it came to this man. She really saw him for who he was as a criminal, and she used him for that. He was about to take the fall for everything. I feel like the dynamic between the two of them, between the two villains, had catastrophic consequences for both of them. And that's how karma works. And last but not least, our number 2 but number 1 villain, Nora. I mean, look at her. She looks terrible. Like a terrible villain. Racist, classist, powerful CEO of a pharmaceutical company that was given to her by her parents. She doesn't give a fuck about the little people whatsoever. She didn't approve of the surrogacy decision, but literally had her hands all in the pot with the doctors and the orders of telling people that so-and-so died and we're not raising so-and-so. Like, how you decide what happens to the babies and you didn't even care the baby was coming, that the babies was coming. Sneaky, devilish, will smile in your face, fake as all get out to get what she wanted. She even abandoned Tessa when she learned that Jenny was her mother. Used her as a pawn and was going to get rid of them both. She tried to weasel her way into Luciano's life to make him the head of the company, and karma hit her good when she learned that he wasn't going to do as she asked. But he was going to be calling all the shots, even from the bed that Karma made for her. So believe me, there's a lot for this one. This one took me on a roller coaster ride. I had to pause several times and catch my breath and just be like, I can't. I had to take a break several times. But the writing, this story was created by someone named Araceli Guajardo. And this writer did their thing, okay? Y'all are going to enjoy this one. Get your popcorns and your teas and your drinks and brace yourselves.